Thank you so much. That reminds us of the days when we only had Charles as the musician, and we still appreciate him greatly. And I forgot to mention, or I didn't mention, that Tony and Andrea have gone to Pennsylvania. She's helping make some decisions about her father and her stepmother. And they're critical decisions because they've come to that point that a decision must be made about their welfare and their living circumstances. So we certainly pray for them. And Maxine, someone else asked about her. She is now moved into, I can't remember the name of it, Orange Grove? Summerfield, thank you. Okay, good. Oh, yes. Maxine, if there's a photo, an icon for being stubborn, you are liable to see Maxine's face. And she usually sits right back there in the corner, but she had insisted on living in her little trailer these years since the last time she brought it back from cross country. And her son and daughter-in-law came last month and moved her into Summerfield. She agreed. I think that's what got most of us. We'd been praying for it, and you talk about a miracle. She agreed. And the only reason she went, she was able to take BJ, her dog, with her. And I understand it's a beautiful new facility. Great. So I'm making a few announcements here related to that. I received a note in the mail from Driftwood Nursing Home, which is over, I believe it's on Broad Avenue down the street from Memorial. And they are looking for people that will come and do readings, daily word, maybe give a talk to the residents there. So I'm going to get in touch with them and volunteer to do one session once a week. And so if there's anyone else that feels called to do that, don't hesitate. They may even want musicians. Just saying. You never know. COVID changed everything, didn't it? Who would have guessed? That pandemic, didn't it change so many things? And what it allowed some of us to do was to, if we had an inner introvert, boy, it came up, didn't it? And came front and center. So much so that when we go to large gatherings now, they're different. They feel different. You can feel people's energy. And if you're sensitive to that, pretty soon you want to go back to your room because it's a lot of energy and we're not accustomed to it. And another thing that's happened is that we've become socially awkward. And so for some of us, Frank's never socially awkward. He can go anywhere and with anybody, and he's never awkward. A lot of us aren't like that. Like I said, we have allowed our inner introvert to surface. And if you are brave, and I'm going to encourage you to be brave, and that's not what my talk about today, I just thought I'd mention it, is that I'm going to encourage you to come back out. I know I mentioned a couple of weeks ago I was talking about spiritual courage and the man after the World War II that hid in a cave for 28 years. 28 years in a cave. He was skin and bones, wearing rags. He didn't know the war was over. and he hid. This was on the island of Guam. And so if we are in a cave right now that was created by the pandemic, maybe it's time to come out little by little, and don't be socially awkward anymore. I even found myself when I was as I said, I was at Unity Village, and that was fine. The crowds were fine. That was great. And then when it was at the conference over at Overland Park, my goodness, there were so many people, and it was loud, and I was like, wow, I'm not accustomed to this. And but we do need to be just like we were when we were children, and we were called on to come to the front of the room to speak. Anybody remember that? And you didn't want to. I remember when I was just a kid and I was supposed to give a talk at the front of the room, and I was so painfully shy. I was the baby of the family, and everybody treated me that way. There were 6 children, and so everybody protected me. You know what I mean. I was the baby, sweet little girl. And so it was easy to get everybody's protection, your older brothers. And then, so when I went to school, my goodness, there was nobody to protect me anymore. When I went to kindergarten, the minute my sister that was a year older than me, Linda, the minute she let loose of my hand to go to her first grade class, and I was going to kindergarten, I started to cry. And I did that for several weeks. It was painful for everybody involved. It really was. So, but anyway, that's how painfully shy I was. But I do remember in 8th grade, and we called it junior high school then. They call it middle school now. But I was supposed to go up to the front of the room and give a talk, as everyone else was, about our summer vacation. I remember how I was shaking, and I don't know how many times I said, well, it was just embarrassing and just terrible. But I made myself do it, and I didn't even cry. And just to finish with what I was saying about that, about learning to be brave. As I got older and saw that I couldn't depend on others to always be there, and I needed to be brave myself, I started exerting my energy a bit, and I would see, and this was even before I knew what an energy field was or an aura or anything, but I would imagine myself being bigger. And my husband reinforced that does work. And I'll tell you how to do it. When we lived down on the lake, around the lake in Kingston, Tennessee, a huge lake, Watts Bar Lake, and we were walking down the road, and there was the meanest dog you've ever seen, a big, mean dog. And I remember, I wouldn't go that direction because I was afraid of him. And so, but not Dan. That didn't stop us at all. All he did was to puff himself up and become mean-looking and got his shoulders, his whole body. He puffed it up and increased his size, and you could feel it just by being with him. Next thing you know, the dog had turned around and was walking away. This was a dog that was just about to attack us. And that's the truth. I have some experience with dogs, or my daughter does, Sherry. When she was 8 years old, a German Shepherd attacked her and bit her face. She has some scars on her face you'll see sometime. And then I told her this is her lesson in life. She has attracted this for some reason. There's a reason everything comes in our lives. There's a reason. And then she was walking on the seawall in Bay St. Louis a few years ago, and it turned out that a neighbor that had a big German Shepherd that was a neighbor of hers, he had been wanting to get to her for forever, but couldn't because they had an electric fence between their yards. Well, it just so happened that the owner had the dog out on the seawall that morning teaching him, and he was pretty far along with his obedience training, and so he was just going to tell him to stay. But when he saw Sherry coming, the temptation was so great that he jumped and bit her knee. Pretty fierce bite too. His owner at first couldn't even get him loose. Yeah, so I told her, I said, honey, you have really attracted that in your lifetime, and there's something you need to learn from it. And the only thing I mentioned, reason I'm mentioning this morning, is because animals sense fear, don't they? They know when you're afraid. And I know that well, because I've had them streaking toward me when I was younger, when they streaked toward me and leave everyone else alone, and that's because they could smell the fear on me. They could, yeah, certainly could. And so anyway, I'm going to leave that alone for right now, but fear is real. And there's only one person that can change that. One person. It's not your older sister. It's not your big mean husband. Not your older brother. There's one person that can change that, and that's you. And whatever it is that you're fearing this morning, and I'm going to ask you in a moment to hold in your consciousness this morning something that you would like to change about yourself. It can be several things, or it can be one. One of the things I wanted to say this morning is that you begin to have true courage and bravery when you realize who you are. If you think you're some little puny so-and-so that can't ever get beyond your circumstances, then you're probably right. If that's what you're thinking, you won't get over it. You will not get over that limitation until you change something. You see that you are more than your circumstances. We teach that every single Sunday. We talk about courage and spiritual courage. And I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that it doesn't come from a bottle. Remember that? I said that my husband reminds me of that saying between guys when they get together. Here, hold my beer and watch this. That is not true courage, okay? You're not going to get your courage from a bottle. You're not. That's not true courage. What you're going to get is hurt if you're not careful. Physically hurt. And it'll hurt your feelings too when you have to face those guys that you just said, watch this. And as you practice the I am presence, your insight, your strength, your wisdom, and your courage are enhanced. And you will begin to look past limiting thoughts that have held you back, and you will break free. Now, I mentioned when we lived in Tennessee in Roane County. That's where we lived. I almost forgot. It's been so many years ago. I had an acquaintance, a woman that at that time, she was probably in her 70s. She was a couple of decades older than I was at that time. And I just loved the conversation because she told me that after being married for 40 years, now you're going to think I'm silly for getting joy out of this or mean or something, but she said that she could not stand being in that relationship one more moment. Her husband retired from the plant, and he came home, and all he wanted to do was watch TV all day long. He didn't want to go anywhere. He didn't want to do anything. He didn't want any entertainment. He wanted her to cook 3 times a day. And then he also wanted her to sit there with him. Well, she was a bit of a rebel, and she said, I decided I wasn't doing that. And I'll tell you why I admired her, and it's because she said that her children wouldn't even speak to her for a long time after she decided to leave their father. So in a sense, not only was she divorcing herself from him, she was divorcing herself from her family. That's hard. That's hard to do. And you know what she did? She went to the place where he had retired, Lockheed Martin. They have a big facility there in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. She got a job to support herself. She said, I don't even want his money. Don't want his house. I don't want anything from him. She got a job so she could travel. And she said every chance she got, she traveled. She went overseas. She went any place she wanted, and she went on cruises. And I said, well, what about him? She said, oh, I wished him well. I didn't wish him any bad luck. I lived with him decades. I wanted him to have a good life. I wouldn't wish him ill for anything. She said he found another woman that wanted to sit and watch TV all day long. And they're perfectly happy. Isn't that amazing? She was so happy, and I was so glad to have met her acquaintance. It was just fascinating, her story. I remember another man that I knew, or a man that I knew that I had known several years. He has passed now. And I knew that he was getting divorced, and I only heard through the grapevine that the reason was that that his wife was the one that was violent. Couldn't control her temper and beating on him. And that was at a time when that wasn't very well known or thought of or talked about. You could hardly even get women that would admit that they lived with violence in their homes, much less a man. And I admired him so. I admired him so because he did leave that situation. And I thought it was wonderful that their 3 children, they stayed in touch with their mother, I know, but they stayed in touch with their father even more and let him know how much they loved him and were grateful that he got himself out of that situation, because he found it hard to defend himself. And the only thing he could do was to leave. But I can't even imagine living in a home where you have someone that's angry all the time. Can you? I just can't imagine it. Cannot imagine. Or I certainly wouldn't stay. And no one should. Children need to live and be brought up in a home where they're loved and they don't have tension and anger around them all the time. Divorce and separation is a whole lot better than that. The children deserve more, don't they? We all do. But I had that song, If I Were Brave. Does anyone remember it? By Janice Stansfield. She's also a New Thought musician, and she wrote that song. I had it running around in my head a few weeks ago, and I asked Charles if he would get the music, and he did. It's a complicated song. I don't even know if we could sing it. It's pretty darn complicated after I looked at it. What would I do if I knew that I could not fail? What's a desire that you have in your heart and you want it so badly? If I believed that the wind would always fill my sail, what would I do? Where would I go? How far would I go? What could I achieve? Trusting the hero in me. We all have a hero, you know. It's inside. You may have had it conditioned out of you. If you were living in a home where you were taught you'd never be good enough, smart enough, you'd never be as good as other people, you may still have that conditioning in you right now. And I'm going to invite you to get rid of it. There's a hero in you. What would I do today if I were brave? And I want you to hold something in your mind and your heart. What would you do if you were brave or courageous? What would you do? Does anyone remember Sidney Poitier? Yeah. Good looking guy, huh? I remember him first when he was in the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Yeah. That was many, many years ago. He was born into poverty in 1927. He weighed 3 pounds. And he was not expected to live. His mother planned to bury him in a shoebox, but somehow he survived. He grew up on a tomato farm in the Bahamas. Yet in 1964, he became the first Bahamian and the first black actor to win both an Academy Award for Best Actor and the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor. In 2009, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the United States' highest civilian award. Because you see, not only a good actor, excellent actor, he was also very kind and very benevolent. And he was extremely brave. He never allowed a poor opinion of himself to hold him back, he said. He said, I was the product of a colonial system that was very damaging to the psyche of non-white people. The darker you were, the less opportunities were presented to you. He said, my parents were terribly, terribly poor. And after a while, the psychology of poverty just begins to eat away at you. You can't help it. It's part of living there and being in that system. But as Mom and Dad, Evelyn and Reggie, mostly Evelyn, never apologized for anything. She made his pants out of flour sacks. Isn't that sweet? He said he had Imperial Flour written on his rear. All the time he was a kid. Isn't that sweet? She always used to say, if it's clean, that's the important thing. He said from his mother, he always knew and wanted to be extraordinary, not ordinary, not just regular, extraordinary. And indeed he was, wasn't he? I know one thing I can thank my parents for. I know I had some of that social conditioning too that I'm still patterning, I'm still trying to get over, but I'm working on it. At least I'm aware and I am working on it. But one of the things I thank my mother for is that we were not allowed to say can't. Excuse me, the word can't. It couldn't be said in our house. She said, can't never did do nothing. Good grammar, huh? She was right. We weren't given excuses. We were taught not to say can't. Say you can and do it. That's the way I grew up. I know that's the way my husband grew up. And I read about another man, excuse me, said he had a grudge against a man when they were young, and this grudge was so deep. And I want y'all to think about this today before I finish, because we got a lot of this going on in the world right now. This grudge was so deep that not only did he hate that man, but he hated the car he drove. He could see that type car in a showroom or on the street, and he'd get so mad he could hardly stand it. Isn't that amazing? That's anger, isn't it? So he said he ran into a man named Neville Goddard. And I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He's written a lot about things. And Neville Goddard taught him to revise the past. Not only rewrite it, not just rescript it, but actually revise the past. And that's what I'm going to invite you to do today. And I want you to use it as an exercise this week if you would. In your quiet time, I want you to think of something that was painful from your youth, okay? That you haven't been able to get over. And that comes up every now and then. You may have even been in therapy for it for 50 years and haven't made any progress at all. Neville Goddard said that you can revise the past. You can actually revise it. He said to go within your quiet time, and even if you do it for a moment before you go to bed, think of this thing and rewrite it. Totally rescript it. Go back into that, whatever it was, whether it was an injury, an accident, something that happened to you, and rewrite the ending. Rewrite the middle and the ending of that, maybe even the first of it. So I know that we have talked a lot about visioning here, but this is the first time I've ever mentioned that, about actually revising something from the past. But he said it is a way of finally getting over something painful. So I don't know. I'm willing to try it. Since I read about it, I have been practicing that as a matter of fact. And not only for myself, but I've been practicing it for the world. So I invite you to give that a thought. Give it a thought. And if you're not willing to revise your past, I would ask you to rewrite it a bit so that the ending doesn't feel quite as painful. Can you do that? It takes some bravery to do something like that. You have to be brave. But you know, Jesus talked a lot about things like that. The metaphysical things that have been taken out of, or the metaphysical meaning has been taken out of his teachings. But he did say, be ye transformed, and that we could be born again. And a lot of other spiritual teachers have said the same thing. So I guess what I wanted to end up with today is that I would encourage you to be brave. Whatever it is that you have not been able to do, unwilling, unable, I would encourage you to take a step forward. Maybe it's a small step, but if it's that important to you, get organized, declutter. If your house looks like a hurricane hit it, straighten it up. Get rid of the clutter. And then get rid of the clutter in your mind. They'll work together, I promise you. I promise you that. Get your mind organized and think of what it is you want to happen in your life. And God's love. Depend on God's love. It will take you to the top of that spiritual mountain that you've been looking for. Have faith. Be God's love in action. Then, and only then, are you going to be able to live in peace and joy. I thank you so much for being here. Happy Father's Day. Thank you for your time.